This season of Tub Talk is brought to you by Barracuda MSP. Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. There are so many ransomware attacks that governments are now classifying them as terrorism. And it's not just big companies that are being targeted. Small and medium-sized businesses are becoming victims too. What are you as an MSP doing to help your clients from becoming the next victim? Barracuda MSP is here to help you ensure you and your clients are prepared and protected against the inevitable ransomware attacks. Let Barracuda MSP help you strengthen your ransomware protection plan. As a special offer for Tub Talk listeners, visit barracudamsp.com/Tub Talk and receive a free first month on any subscription you start with Barracuda MSP. That's barracudamsp.com/Tub Talk and receive a free first month on any subscription you start with Barracuda MSP. Thanks to Barracuda MSP for helping bring you Tub Talk. Now, on with the show. Well, hello there, and welcome to episode 100 of Tub Talk, the podcast for IT consultants. I know, 100, right? So this season is focused on the amazing women in tech. And for episode 100, we wanted to invite a very special guest and someone who is a personal tech hero of mine. Now, Maggie Philbin, OBE, has worked in radio and television for over 30 years on a wide range of science, medical, and technology programs, from Tomorrow's World to Bang Goes the Theory. In 2008, Maggie co-founded TeenTech, an award-winning organization which works across the UK, getting young people innovating, creating, building skills, and preparing for a fast-changing future. TeenTech helps support students, parents, and teachers, helps them understand the real opportunities in contemporary industry. In January 2017, she was awarded an OBE for her work to promote careers in STEM and the creative industries. Maggie is also the patron of the Council for Professors and Heads of Computing and has been awarded 10 honorary degrees and fellowships for her work. In short, Maggie Philbin is a legend, and I am beyond thrilled that she's agreed to be my 100th guest here on this very special edition of Tub Talk. Maggie, welcome to the show. Where are you joining us from today?
I live in London, so I'm joining you from my sitting room.
Wow.
And thank you for inviting me to such a special occasion.
No, my absolute pleasure.
Are we having cake? At least a birthday cake.
At least a birthday cake. Yes, we will do that. I never need an excuse for cake, but episode 100, we definitely are going to have cake. Look, we've got an audience from all around the world listening here today. For folks here in the UK, for certain, Maggie, you're a household name through your work on television and radio. Do you mind? I want to talk about Tomorrow's World and your other TV work during our conversation, but right off the bat, I want to jump into the work that you do with organizations to find ways of improving diversity in science, technology, and engineering, or the STEM subjects. What drives your passion behind this work?
I think really it's a combination of the fact that it wasn't until I started work on Tomorrow's World that I had any sense of the scale of opportunity out there. And also understanding that so many young people simply don't get the access to a network which enables them to really understand what those opportunities are. And so the real driver is, there is so much potential sitting in classrooms all over the UK. And I just want to make sure that those kids know how brilliant they could be and really how to seize the opportunity with both hands. Yeah,
and you founded TeenTech in 2008. Tell us about the work that TeenTech does.
Well, as you sort of say, the aim is to help those young people understand three things, really. We all know it's a really fast-changing world, and the world of tech and IT that you came into is certainly not the one that it is today. And it is fast-changing, so it's impossible for teachers and parents to keep across all of that. So finding ways to connect young people to the horse's mouth is what we aim to do. So it's helping them understand what's out there. But the next thing is helping them profoundly understand that they would really enjoy working in that space, because unless they really feel that, it doesn't matter how much you say, there's so many opportunities, you're not going to want to do it unless you think you're going to enjoy it. So, basically what TeenTech does is to give students those opportunities to discover their own potential, really. So we start very much where the kids are. So we don't start with a mission saying we need to get X thousand, UX designers or whatever. We start by saying, what are you interested in? And then no matter what a young person says, they're always going to need digital skills at some level. So we start with their interest, whether it's because, one of the things a couple of years ago that came up so often was they were all wanted to be tattooists, so helping see how the, digital skills could really help them with that was quite interesting. But seriously, we know that so many kids, if they don't have that moment where they understand that no matter how they are being graded at school, that isn't necessarily the same thing as the personal qualities they could bring to a career in tech. Because as you and I know, that that's very different. You could get grade A's and still not be the person who's going to be very valuable in a team. Whereas you could be the slightly disruptive, cheeky teenager who actually is going to be that bold, creative thinker who's going to come up with the next massive product. So it's installing that sense of confidence into kids is what we do. Because my personal view here, not the official view of TeenTech, is that I think a lot of what happens in education can knock the stuff out of some students. And I think that's a real pity. And also, it can knock the stuff out of some students and also out of the teachers themselves, because they want to do the best for their students. And sometimes the system doesn't enable them to do that.
Yeah, we talk about the students. I also want to talk about the teachers as well. My wife works in schools, and so I hear from all the highs and all the lows of working in motivating students and helping students grow. For me personally, I'm not sure I've ever said this publicly, but when I started out understanding what computers were, I was bought a secondhand Atari 600 XL when I was about 7-8 years old by my parents. But it was really one of my school teachers, a chap called Mike Fisher, who encouraged me. We had one computer in the school computer, but when we're going back there, and Mr. Fisher saw that I was, had an interest in it and got passionate about it, and really encouraged me from there on in, without knowing a great deal about IT himself. So what does, TeenTech do in terms of enabling the teachers to have the confidence to enable the pupils to be the best that they can?
Yeah, well, what we do with all of at the moment, the vast majority of what we're running is happening virtually because of COVID, but normally it's a mix of virtual and physical events. And I think one of the things that which is quite key about TeenTech is the way that we bring in industry experts of every which kind. So we can do a really quite an intense session, and it might be on, animation, it might be on website design or whatever. And we're not putting the burden on the teacher to know all of this. We've got the industry experts who are there. So the teacher does what they do best in terms of the class, and we've got the industry experts supporting with that amazing back catalogue of knowledge that they've got. So if a child asks a question, then there is an expert on hand who can answer it. So it is that real blend. And so for teachers, we do CPD events, but in a sense, everything TeenTech does is a CPD event. And the students we ask the students to give us areas that they are interested in, which is, that thing about starting where the students actually are, as opposed to where you want them to be. And the suggestions are many and various. And then we build the sessions. So, I mean, I'm learning. It's, I don't put myself on a throne thinking, right, here you are, here are some kernels of learning. I'm learning alongside the students, and the teachers are learning alongside the students. And basically, I suppose what TeenTech does is it puts things into context. And no curriculum or exam board can really keep pace with the change that we're experiencing at the moment.
Yeah.
And so, but what we can do is to show how certain aspects of what they might be doing at school, actually are valuable in the workplace, because we just show how that learning is being applied. So the teachers are very, very much part of this, what I think is a great community of learners, because as you and I know, you never stop learning. I learn things all the time. And that's something as well. I mean, I think that is an important thing for the young people to see, because, like when I was at school, I think I did look upon the teacher as the fountain of all knowledge, because the teacher had the knowledge and the teacher was giving all of that knowledge to you. But the thing is that, things have changed. And, if you, as a teacher, I think they feel slightly, obviously I shouldn't really speak on behalf of teachers, but, your wife would know, is that if you put yourself on that pedestal, you can be rocked off it. Whereas if you are sort of saying, look, I want to catch up on the latest thinking of all of this too, then you're in a very safe place. And also you're setting an important example to your students, which is the learning never stops. And it's really important that the learning never stops.
Yeah.
Because, that's how you keep relevant.
Yeah, that's how you keep, as you say, that's how you keep learning. I'm still learning, from the work that I do with IT businesses every day. And it's such an exciting industry, technology, because things are changing all the time. If you are uncomfortable with change, technology is not the industry for you, is it? Because it is always changing. I've just learned that digital tattooing is a thing there. So thank you for teaching me that one. Now, I first met and talked to you many years ago at the CompTIA conference in London. Many of our listeners will be familiar with CompTIA. They're a huge supporter of advancing women in technology, and they've got a very strong philanthropic drive as well to support initiatives like TeenTech and others. Does TeenTech do a lot of collaborating with organizations like CompTIA?
Yeah, no, we've done things with CompTIA and with CompTIA members, and everything we do is collaborative, because when we first set up TeenTech, I had no idea that I was setting up an organisation. I thought I was running a one-off event in 2008, and it grew legs and has grown and grown, and here we are. But one of the early decisions we made was, because you had a choice, basically, you either become like a mini company, which means that you do everything, you take the burden of delivering everything yourself, which means that obviously to do more, you have to expand and expand and expand, or you collaborate. And that way, to me, it made sense for a million different reasons, because by collaborating, everyone learns, you share the learning, it enables you to scale far more swiftly, and it's just much more sensible. And also because I think I had seen quite a few examples of people who set things up with the best will in the world, and then after a relatively short period of time, when they were reaching out for funding, it was mainly to keep themselves going as opposed to deliver projects.
Right.
I thought, how do we not fall into that trap? And it was, let's collaborate. And so that's the model. So the core of TeenTech is really small. People are often amazed when they realize how small it is. But we collaborate with, I think it's now probably about 45 different universities, over 300 different companies who work with us. Some of them are sponsors, some of them provide volunteers, some of them provide expertise, some of them, share what we're doing. So everyone does different things with us, and it is quite a complicated thing to keep on top of. But I just feel that's the best way of doing things. So that's a very long answer to your question, isn't it?
No, it's wonderful to hear, when you said 45 universities and all these different organizations and stuff. And whilst we're talking about TeenTech here, I think there's a lesson for the owners of the IT businesses who listen to this podcast here as well. I've often talked about collaboration between different technology organizations as a way, that old adage, isn't it? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. That's not just, glib words, though. It actually means something in this industry as a whole. So.
Yeah, no, we've always been collaborative, even sometimes when, you might think it's not in our best interests to be so. But my sort of benchmark is, if we do this, with this organization, is it going to benefit young people? And if the answer is yes, then we do. And we take the risks that might involve, because that's the right thing to do. And if people are not straightforward to deal with, shall we say, well, then, so be it. But, our aim is always to help as many young people as we can have opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise have had.
Yeah, and you are doing wonderful work with it. Now, at the start of this season of Tub Talk, we're focusing on amazing women in technology. I interviewed Baroness Berridge, the UK's Minister for Equality and Women, or Elizabeth, as I rather cheekily called her throughout the interview. Now, I know that in November 2013, you led a digital task force to look at the best ways to encourage young people to develop the digital skills of the future. I guess my question is, what role does the government have in encouraging young people for a career in technology, or indeed any of the STEM topics?
I think, and again, this is me talking personally now, I think we do need to have a fairly serious rethink about what happens within schools. We are in the 21st century. We are facing unprecedented challenges. Obviously we've got, COP26, where all of our global leaders are coming together to try and work out what we do, about climate change. But there are challenges on every front in terms of poverty and education and health and equality. So there's a massive amount of work to be done. And sometimes I think for young people in school, it's really quite hard for them to grasp some of the relevance of the nature of how they're being assessed. And they can't see the point of what they're learning. And if the way we approached learning at school was really delivering for us in terms of giving employers the kind of employees who they felt were going to work well, or, giving students the right mindset to be able to set companies up and, deliver exciting new ideas, then, I wouldn't be saying this. But I don't think that is quite what's happening. And instead, we've just got a bit of I think we're trapped at the moment in the way that education is running in a circle. You've got obviously the examination boards who are trying to set exams which are meaningful. You've got Ofsted monitoring what happens in the schools. You've got schools trying to feature as high as they can in the various performance charts. But none of that helps enough students realize their own potential, and the potential, whether you regard it as, UK PLC or the Earth PLC, it's simply not delivering. And so I just think it's time maybe for a bit of a rethink, not in a way that would, send teachers thinking, oh no, not again, not again, we can't, But one of the things I was really hoping would come out of the pandemic, which has led to so much uncertainty in schools. And, schools have demonstrated how brilliant they are at being this linchpin of the community, because that's what they absolutely became. And I was really hoping that might be part of a seismic change in how schools approached learning, and how teachers were supported and helped, to do the jobs that they know they love, as opposed to, help the teachers do the jobs that they love and in the way that they feel is in the best interests of their students. That's what I think the government could really, support. And I think sometimes there's a lot of focusing on things which are not really relevant to the challenges of today.
Yeah, I would agree. And interestingly, I think even though we're talking, you and I, from a very UK-centric perspective, the audience of this podcast, the listeners, are from all over the world. I am willing to bet, though, there are people in North America, in Australia, in Europe listening to this and nodding along and saying, yeah, this is what our government, this is the way we need to change education local to us as well. Because I do think it's a global thing. I don't think it's just UK specific from that perspective, is it?
Yeah. I mean, our whole system needs to be far more inclusive, and just give schools a chance to be more engaging. Because the kids become disengaged because either they don't think what's happening is relevant, or they think it's very dull. And there are so many different ways that learning can be approached.
Yeah.
And the thing that really has sort of saddened me are great teachers leaving the profession, and I just because it's just become too stressful and not what they really signed up to do.
Yeah. Which is very sad.
That's very sad. On the other hand, you've got these amazing teachers who, as far as I'm concerned, especially over the last, at any point, but especially over the last, whatever it is, 19 months or so, have just done this extraordinary juggling act in what they've done to support their students.
Yeah, agreed. My wife would be absolutely agreeing with you at this point as well. So, she has worked incredibly hard along with all of her colleagues, doing remote work, being in the, in the office, but in the school, doing everything that's asked for them. So a big thank you to everybody involved in education. On that topic, I'm a stepfather to 2 teenage boys. So I've got a rough idea of what they think of the IT industry, or what they think of the tech industry as a whole. What's your experience of speaking to young people about the IT industry, about technology? How do they view it at the moment?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. They don't know a great deal about it. Their enthusiasm varies hugely, and it depends what kind of contract they may or may not have had. So if they know someone, if there's someone in their family or a family friend or something who works in tech, then they may have a bit more of an idea about what might be possible. And when students do find out what's possible, there is no stopping them. One of the approaches that TeenTech uses is the kids take part in a program called the TeenTech Awards program, where they develop their own ideas, and it's very open, brief. Can you make life better, simpler, safer, or more fun using science and tech? And the ideas are many and various, but the point is, it's an idea which that student, for whatever reason, cares about and believes in, and then we connect that student with mentors, and they go on a bit of a, it's a bit of a cliche to talk about a learning journey, but that's what they go on, in very unexpected ways, sometimes. And then what you see emerging at the end of that are young people who are incredibly enthusiastic about tech, because they've just had a sense of not only this is a really important area, but actually, I could do something in this area, because and so then their opinion changes. But if they don't have access, if I take my own daughter is now 33. But one of the reasons I set TeenTech up was because she was, I don't know, would have been 15 or 16 at the time. And she had absolutely, if I said to her about, why don't you think about a career in tech? It was just like, you're kidding me. Why would I want to do that?
Yeah.
Because everything she experienced at school, which then it was called simply IT, and it was all about sort of spreadsheets and Word documents. But I guess so. She absolutely couldn't see the point of, why would you want to do that? So she went off and she did a degree in geography. But then after doing that degree, she worked with a mate of mine straight out of university. He'd got a startup. I asked him, would he like to borrow Rose for 6 months? and that meant she got lots of experience and started to think, actually, maybe this world of tech that, mum's been banging on about forever might be for me. And now, she's had the most amazing career in tech. But the thing there, the massive advantage that Rose had was that I knew someone. We could afford, when Rose finished uni, for her to go and work for free because the person who had his startup certainly couldn't afford to pay anybody at that stage. And that's what we want to make available to everybody, is that network. Is right, so you really enjoy this. Well, and that's what TeenTech does, is just to connect students to people who we feel are going to give them experiences, give them insight. Like we had some students in Brixton who had got a really nice idea for. In fact, we got them to demonstrate their product at a CompTIA meeting.
Right.
These lads from Brixton, it was a comic and a sort of an interactive comic, and using sort of AR, and you held your mobile phone over the comic, and then you were able to download games. Anyway, it was a nice idea, and we connected those students to the CTO of Disney in the States, and the purpose of doing that was because we wanted those students to have the experience of talking to someone really inspirational, just get that. Because it's very motivating if someone like that sits and listens to your idea and goes, I really like that. Nick was really good because he sort of said, look, if this was my idea, I know what I would do, but I've got 500 people sitting behind me who I can go, right, here you go, get on with it. There's just 3 of you, so here are the things that I think you could do to build on this idea and start to turn it into something. And as a result of that conversation, to cut a very long story short, they built the product, they learned a new programming language, and they've gone into tech careers.
Wow.
And that, he provided that bit of motivation, rather like your teacher did for you, because we all need that person who essentially goes, I'm going to take you seriously here because I think you've got it in you. And one of the kids, and he is very open. He's joined our young person advisory group for TeenTech, and he said the whole reason he got involved with the TeenTech in the first place was because he was always in detention for one thing or another, and the teacher who led what was then like a TeenTech club said, look, you're always in here, you might as well come and be part of this thing rather than sitting over there doing whatever detention assignment had been given to him. And that's, so it is really gratifying from my point of view, that when you see the way that students start saying, actually, this is an interesting world. What's more, I can be part of it.
Yeah, I think, everybody listening's got that opportunity, because we all know young people in, we can open doors, we can offer inspiration, we can offer motivation. So absolutely. On that point, so we've talked about, things that what governments can do at a national and global level. We've talked about universities and schools. On a more grassroots level, what can the owners of small and medium-sized IT businesses do to attract young people and more girls and women into the IT industry? Because IT, or certainly the sector of IT that I work in, tends to be very male dominated. So I'm wondering, what can we do? What can the listeners of this show do at a more grassroots level to encourage more girls and women into the industry?
Oh, I think there's lots. I think one of the things which often happens is a company will go, right, well, we need to go out there and run some kind of an initiative. But what I always encourage people to do is to take a long, hard look at themselves first and think, okay, so how many, like when we're recruiting, sort of like, what's the balance of, what's the gender balance when we're recruiting? How good are we at retaining staff? If we're not that good at retaining, how long do people stay? Why do they leave us? And what could we do to change what's going on? Because sometimes, one of the like advertising is an industry which has no trouble whatsoever in gender recruitment initially, but they have pretty similar issues. If you go up you rise up through middle management, blah, blah, that, at board level, you can simplifying things here, but you almost like parachute people onto a board. But that thing about right the way, keeping that balance or just thinking, well, why is the shift? They have issues too. So it's not just about, can we be better at recruiting? And the answer is probably always, all things that we can do. But really take a long, hard look at what are we doing to make sure that once we've got that talent on board, that we're doing everything we can to support it, that we aren't subconsciously, because of the culture of a company, being less, inclusive and about the way we do things.
That makes an awful lot of sense, and especially around the culture of the business. But really interestingly, I've spoken to a number of amazing women on the show this season. Many of them, in fact, nearly all of them, have told me that they work in IT because of something we mentioned earlier, the changing nature of the industry. They never get bored. They say they love turning up every day and there's something new. So I guess the question here would be, how can IT business owners emphasize that excitement when they're recruiting for the roles, instead of just saying, oh yeah, there's a job description, we pay this much money and it's in tech? How can they emphasize that this is an exciting time to work in tech?
Yeah, well, I mean, they could start by putting that in the job.
Yes.
I think the way an ad is worded is really important.
Agreed.
And I think it's also about being being realistic when you're recruiting. I mean, sometimes you do need, for whatever job it is, a very specific skill. And if you need that specific skill, and if it takes 10 years to have that specific skill, then fair enough, put that in the job description. But if the skills that you need, the specific skills, can be learned relatively quickly, and what you're after really is someone who is, the thing that made me apply for my job in telly all those years ago wasn't the stuff that they put in the ad about what you would be able to do, but there was a little phrase that said, or would you be willing to learn? Now that made me apply. Now, that's what should go in every description, because essentially that's what you want. You want someone who's willing to learn, and depending on, and be able to, roll with the developments of your company, because whatever level you come in, like we've been saying, you're always going to need to learn and adapt and do new things. If you're recruiting people at the very early stages of the career, then you want people maybe who are coachable, So it's just sort of really thinking hard about what do you really want, and you have to have that long list of things. Do you really have to? Do you really need someone to be able to do all of those things?
Yeah. That absolutely makes sense. When I ran my IT business, and I still say to the owners of IT businesses now, when I recruited, I always recruited for personality, because the tech skills were easy to teach, in my opinion, or relatively easy to teach. To teach somebody, customer service and all these other things, or just to be inquisitive, to be curious, that's something that's really difficult to teach. We all always used to recruit for personality first.
Absolutely. So, when I do sort of presentations, I often show something which I think it was the World Economic Forum produced this wonderful wheel of the digital skills that everyone really needs to learn. And it's a multicolored wheel, packed full of all these different skills. And I think, that's for sure. That's absolutely, it's very important we develop these skills. But just as you say, that there are personal qualities which I put around the outside of that wheel, like, thinking bold, being able to work in a team, being able to both give and accept feedback, and, leadership qualities, resilience, blah, blah, blah. And just as you say, those things take years to learn. You can't just say to someone, look, can you just think a bit more big and bold? Because if you've never had the opportunity to think big and bold, and most importantly, if you've never been able to do that in a relatively safe place where it's accepted that if you do think big and bold, sometimes your big and bold thinking is not going to be successful, you're just not going to be able to do it. So, that's one of the, again, I'm doing some work with one of the exam boards at the moment, and I hope I'm not being too deep a thorn in their flesh, but I keep on saying, why don't we give students the ability to fail at certain things, but for them to acknowledge that they know that they've made a mistake, so can we, because that admission of, right, I've done this, but I know it's not right. I'm trying to work out what's wrong, etc. Those are important things for people just to be able to do at any stage in their career, to accept actually. And how often have we seen people persist with projects which are a total disaster, but they don't want to admit that it's not working. So it's just like, no, we're going to carry on. It's like, well, why are we going to carry on with this? Because it's not actually working.
Yeah, there's an argument that a lot of IT projects, especially at the government level and further, could probably, that accusation could be made in them. But we will not gloss over that. We will leave that subject there. I want to give a shout out to one of the initiatives that TeenTech has launched, which at the time this podcast will be ongoing, I should say, at the time this episode is released. And it's actually focused on my adopted region of the northeast of England. So I'm at home in the studio garage in Newcastle upon Tyne, in my home here in the northeast. Tell us what TeenTech Northeast Live looks like.
Ooh, yes. Well, from the beginning of November, right the way through to the end of March, we're running a lot of live sessions for young people. Generally, they're around about an hour. And students and teachers and parents can join them. The live session goes out at a certain time of day, but if you know that you want to see the session but you can't join it live, you can send questions up front so that your questions will still be answered. And we cover every which area of industries which actually are going to be very important in the northeast. So it's not about career areas which we talk about them, but it's not happening. These are things which are going to be very much happening in that region, and I'm really excited about it. I think there's been a narrative, and which I find quite disturbing amongst young people, which is, I'm not saying it's of hopelessness, but there's been this narrative about, not going to be, much harder for you to get a job, blah, blah. But, the jobs are changing, but there are a lot of opportunities, and they are right there in the Northeast. So we just wanted to shine a spotlight on those opportunities, whether it's, within the Freeport or, Nissan, the kind of people that they're looking for, the LM Wind Power with, what's happening there, animation companies, et cetera. We're covering a broad spectrum of industries. So So if you are listening to this and you're a parent or a company in the Northeast and you want to get involved, then go on the TeenTech website and you'll find details of how to be part of it.
Absolutely. We will include links in the show notes to everything that we've talked about to do with TeenTech, to do with TeenTech Northeast Live and CompTIA and everything else as well. Talking tech for a moment, I'm interested, Maggie, what technology trends are you finding most exciting right now? For instance, I know you've been intrigued by the potential for low latency 5G and the impact that can have. What excites you in the tech space right now?
I always get excited when I see people doing really cool projects. And you mentioned 5G there. And I think a lot of people have been going, oh, well, isn't it just like, on my phone, there's just going to be a new little thing. And, but it has the potential to be an absolute game changer for all sorts of industries. I mean, game design is an obvious one, because it means that things which might have, if you're keen on playing games that you may have only been able to experience properly by being, literally hardwired to your, your game console at home, that you'll be able to do some really cool things out and about, because the low latency of 5G means that everything sort of speeds up and more people can do more of the same stuff in the same place. And that is, from a very practical point of view, means if you go to a music festival, and whereas normally you can't even send a text because the bandwidth is eaten up, that will disappear. But it also, the thing that really excites me are some of the imaginative opportunities. So I was talking to someone from the music industry, and obviously the music industry, in terms of their carbon footprint, it's quite a heavy footprint, really, with all of the I can never say that, the big trucks. My mum always used to say, don't use words if you can't say them. Massive trucks carrying,
yes.
All of the equipment around. And what he was sort of saying was that, in the same kind of way that people go to the pub to watch a match, that, having ways for people to interact with music in similar ways, but also to have musicians who might be able to play simultaneously to all over the world. But say you had one of those musicians in your village, so you had a gathering of, 1,000 people or whatever from your village. So you've got someone there who might be playing, bass guitar, but the lead singer might be in Mexico, and that this is all possible. And they've done experiment, and I get very excited by things like that, because I think, gosh, this is a way of really doing things in communities that could be very exciting. So I think 5G is a game, and actually, obviously, I focused on the creative industries. So with 5G, and looked at what organisations like the National Gallery and the Royal Shakespeare Company are doing, which is great. But the opportunities for industry and health are also very much there. So that I find very exciting. And the other area that I'm very interested in is the whole area of data. And we introduced within our TeenTech Award programme the use of data as a judging category across all of our awards, which is because we just felt it was so important. And even if the students had just a glimpse of that this is going to be an ever-growing area, and it's important for two reasons. There's going to be masses of jobs in that field, but also it's really important from a personal point of view that you have an understanding of the value of your own data, and the way you need to respect other people's data as well. That, we just wanted those things to be had to come together. But I've seen some. I was talking to a really interesting company who use satellites to collect data, on, as you might imagine, on things like deforestation in terms of climate change. But they do things in a really sophisticated way by partnership working. So they've partnered up with, it's a organisation in Scotland, and I'll remember the name of the organisation, but I want to call it, say, Wildlife Scotland, but it's probably not called that. But basically, an organisation that is working on the ground in Scotland. And so what they are doing with combining the satellite data with very granular information about the way the whole landscape is changing in Scotland means that they can prioritize. We all know there's loads of things that we need to do, but what is it important? What should be our list of priorities? So we need to make sure that we don't destroy any more of the peat bogs in Scotland, because that they take millions of years to develop, or thousands of years, certainly. So that needs to be an absolute top priority. Planting trees grow in the scheme of things relatively quickly. I was just really interested by that, the fairly granular detail that they were able to provide. If you can only do 4 things, these are the 4 things you should do right now.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. I mean, first of all, the 5G that you mentioned, because most people just think, oh yeah, it's going to be, my Netflix is going to go fast. I'm going to get faster movies or whatever, but it's much more than that, isn't it? Much more than that. But when you mention about the data as well, we are capturing data at just an incredible rate, and it's only the capture of data is only going to become bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm looking around the room, where I am here, dozens of devices every second capturing all sorts of data. What are we doing with that data? Are we dealing with that data in an ethical perspective? And how can we make positive changes in the world using that data? So I absolutely agree with you. I think it's just, huge opportunities within there. You mentioned your mom earlier, who sounds like a very wise lady indeed. I've heard you talk about your dad before and said that he was a techie. But you've also mentioned earlier on that it wasn't until you started work on Tomorrow's World that you had any real sense of the wide range of opportunities in a tech career. What caught your attention initially about a career in tech? What still excites you about a career in tech today?
Oh, it's always the people. It's not the widgets.
Yeah.
It's the people, and I think it's the problem solving, aspect of it. I mean, if I, think back to the, like when I was doing Tomorrow's World, I think one of the things that struck me was I'd never imagined that there were so many problems that needed to be solved. I think, some of the sort of like quite wacky devices. I mean, it was things like I always remember one that stood out was like this fishing rod that lit up in the dark, and you kind of think, I never knew this was a problem. And the fact that you can't see your fishing rod in the dark, so that I think was very interesting. But it is the people, and I think that was the thing that suddenly, it was like a massive penny dropping when I joined Tomorrow's World and saw just the different routes that people had come into technology, the different ways that they were innovating, and I just found it absolutely fascinating. And the stories, the tenacity of some of those innovators. I mean, Dyson is someone who, people often sort of quote, but he and his wonderful cleaner were on Tomorrow's World, when it was a concept, because that was the thing about Tomorrow's World, is that we always had things before they ever appeared, obviously in the shops. But they were always very much, prototypes. And so Dyson's cleaner came on the show 15 years before it appeared in the shops.
Wow.
And I think Dyson did something like, it was over 5,000 prototypes.
I've heard that, yeah.
And I just thought, gosh, the tenacity of this person. And you can sort of imagine his family going, give up on the cleaner.
Yes.
Go look at the wheelbarrow or whatever, but yeah, so it was that, the personality of the people involved, and I think something that has been with me from when I left school really was I always loved working in a team, and that was the thing that has always excited. I love being part of a team which is rowing in the same direction. And I've been very fortunate. I was fortunate on Swap Shop in the early days, and then on Tomorrow's World, and then on Hospital Watch and subsequent telly shows. And then now with TeenTech, and I realized when I reflected on it a couple of years ago, that's what I've just wanted to create with TeenTech, is that team. Because it's actually no fun doing things on your own. Yeah. It's great fun doing it with people. And sometimes it's great fun doing it with people who disagree with you, because you kind of need people like that within the team going, that's mad, or come on, we definitely can do it. That's just great. And
I love that.
Yeah, I bet.
Thank you for sharing that. We mentioned Tomorrow's World. I grew up watching Tomorrow's World in the 1980s. I'd go as far as to say it was a huge influence on me in choosing a career in tech. And I think I speak for a lot, certainly of the UK listeners to this show will probably feel the same way. However, for any of our younger audience, or perhaps, this show goes out all across the world, for anybody outside of the UK, could you explain what the Tomorrow's World TV show looked like?
Well, the premise was this was shown. I mean, I wasn't. It started in 1965. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I wasn't presenting it then. I was a child myself watching it, and the premise of the show was just showing you the innovations of the future. And I joined the program in the 1980s, and when we showed things on the program, we were showing and demonstrating them for the very first time. That would have been the first time that you, however old you were then, would have seen whatever it was that we were showing. And it was really important to us. And we were incredibly sniffy. It's like, if it's been a new scientist, no, not interested. People had to have not shown whatever it was. And we had some extraordinary prototypes. And as I say, things years before they became a product. And so there was a huge amount of trust involved. But the key thing about Tomorrow's World was that it was live. So this wasn't pre-recorded. And so it was a live show. There were 4 of us presenting it. It was half an hour long. And until the closing titles ran, your stomach never stopped turning over. It was so badly wrong at any time. And I still can't hear the Tomorrow's World theme music without feeling faintly sick. But that, I think, for many was one of the attractions of the show. It was such an honest program.
Yes. I seem to recall, watching when I was younger, and obviously memory fades sometimes, but some of the demonstrations going wrong. So I always assumed it was live, or you were very very broad with the editing and just sort of left it in, or very raw with it. Can you remember any that went spectacularly wrong at the time? Anything? You talked about that knot in the pit of your stomach when you hear the music now. Is there any things that come back and just make you sort of shudder a little bit and think, oh my goodness?
Well, it's quite interesting, because there were things that went wrong, and they went wrong, and it was a surprise that they went wrong. Now, in a funny kind of way, that was easier to deal with. I mean, before I did Tomorrow's World, I'd done 4 years on Saturday mornings where, there was no script. So I was quite used to getting myself out of tricky situations. And the thing you always had to be prepared to do was, if your item was supposed to run at 2 minutes 20 or 3 minutes 40, that's what you had to do. Otherwise, you would mess up things, not only for yourself, but everybody else. So you had to have a bit of a plan B. But if something suddenly went wrong, in a weird kind of way, that was fine. The thing that was awful was when you went on air knowing that there was a very high chance that it wasn't going to work.
Right.
And that was truly dreadful, because you knew you just felt like an absolute, victim, that you'd got however long to talk about whatever, and it was unlikely to do what you were going to say it was going to do. So that was much worse. And so to answer your question properly, I think anything voice activated was a nightmare. And it was a nightmare for a very practical reason, which is that in a very subtle way, your voice does change when you are doing something live. So no matter how much you rehearse with your voice, I remember this was the very early days of voice activated technology, that you could never absolutely capture what your voice would be like when you were live.
Yeah.
And so then the thing wouldn't do what it was supposed to do. And I've got lots of memories of voice, whenever someone said, oh, it's voice activated, but it's really good, your heart sank, and you thought, no, I know what's going to happen. And that was awful. Yeah. But it was a beautiful, beautiful show to do. And talking about teams, a marvelous presenting team. We always helped each other. It's like if you could see someone was in trouble, you lurked in case you could go and help them through whatever bit of disaster was going on. So it was very supportive on camera. But the production team were amazing. And we had a wonderful studio director who very sadly died just a few months ago, very suddenly and tragically, called Stuart MacDonald. And he was the absolute best. So sometimes you would be doing an item and it would start to go wrong. Now, in your ear, because we wore earpieces, you would hear Stuart, and typically you would go, right, Maggie, well, here in the gallery, we're all waiting with bated breath to see how you get out of this one. And having a voice like that made it all right, because you felt they were on your side. And if you'd had a studio director who was in a panic and flapping, but Stuart was this wonderful voice of calm and, reason, and sort of said, well, you've got 2 more minutes of this, Maggie. I hate to let you know, but, and then, when something went wrong, you'd hear Stuart say, going well. And it was lovely. And so that was very supportive. And the liveness, and the fact that sometimes things didn't go right. The liveness and the fact that sometimes things didn't go according to plan was very much part of the show's appeal. People, they were the bits that people enjoyed,
Yeah, great memories of that show. You were part of Tomorrow's World until was the early mid-90s, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I after my daughter was born, I left, and then I came back in the 90s to do some reporting, and that was nice. And then obviously came back much more recently with Bang Goes the Theory, but it was an absolute joy. And the people who I work with, both on screen and off, remain my closest and dearest friends. We were united in that fear.
Oh, that's absolutely lovely. If you are listening to this, I should say, Maggie's talking about doing live demonstrations of untested technology on air, and you're freezing a little bit. Next time you go to do a presentation or a demonstration to your clients and think, I hope Windows works properly, or I hope this, just remember, it's a drop in the ocean compared to what Maggie and the team did on Tomorrow's World there. So that's definitely one way to look at it. If you are listening to this and you've not heard of Tomorrow's World before, and I think a large portion of the audience will remember it very fondly, but if you're younger or perhaps outside the UK, not familiar with it, go and check out some of the archive footage on YouTube. An absolute treat. Some incredible, incredible footage, which I want to mention a couple of them later on, Maggie, but would you be open to answering some questions from listeners? Because
absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
You've got so many fans in the tech industry, and I happened to mention to a few people that I was doing this interview, and they were like, oh, can you ask Maggie this question? Can you ask Maggie that question? So I promised a few people, some loyal listeners, that I'd ask the question. So Craig Sharp, who runs a brilliant managed service provider and IT business based out of Birmingham and a good friend, Craig asked, do you think we as a society have lost the wow factor on technology? So given that when Maggie was on Tomorrow's World, almost every demonstration was innovative and amazing, do you think we've lost that in modern society?
I think one of the things which obviously is different now to when I was presenting Tomorrow's World is the internet. And if you are interested in technology, that is obviously the most fantastic window on what is happening. So I think if you want to find out about it, you can, in a way that simply wasn't possible in the 1980s. But the other thing that is something I feel quite strongly about is that when there are tech shows on the telly, frequently they are about home technology or consumer technology, and not about, because technology, as you know, is absolutely massive. Now, home tech is important because it affects each and every one of us, but then you do get locked in a kind of iteration of here's the new iPhone or whatever, as opposed to people working on developments which may not see the light of day for another 10 years. So I think maybe sometimes it's to do with the reporting of technology. And then I also wonder, because the other thing, and I never quite got to the bottom of it really, is when I was reporting on Tomorrow's World, we really did show things which were at prototype stage. And nowadays there is a lot of secrecy, obviously, around people's innovations. There's a fear of them being copied. So, maybe that is something that is, it's harder for people to feel confident about sharing their tech. Whereas I think maybe the impetus that people knew, if they weighed that up, that Tomorrow's World had a great audience, and if you'd got something in its infancy, that there could be someone watching who would help you take it further, and so it was worth taking the risk. I don't know. It's something I've often thought about.
Great question, Craig.
No, it's a really, really great question, and maybe we have got to the stage where we're more surprised by what technology can't do than what it can.
Yeah, well, we've got a couple of questions around that. But talking of, here's another question. Talking of amazing women in IT, Tracy Pound from Tamworth asks, and Tracy's been a guest on the podcast before, an incredible lady. She says, more tech businesses are run by men than women. What can we do to support men looking to increase gender diversity in their business and not just leave them feeling frustrated and without a plan? I love this question from Tracy, because we're talking about practical advice, and many of the listeners to this show, men, run IT businesses, want to encourage more girls and women into IT, but feel frustrated that they can't think of a concrete plan to do so.
Yeah. And it's a great question, because I think it's really important that men are absolutely part of the conversation, and on trying to unpick if they're running a company and they want to make it, their employees and people working in it much more diverse. And I think one of the things always is that if you want to change, because sometimes, and I'm not saying that all companies are like this, but some seem to be, is they want to achieve diversity, but they don't necessarily want to change to do it. It's like, we want a diverse workforce, but no, we're not going to change anything. We just want people in here doing things in the same kind of way. And I think an appreciation that of people being able to work differently, but still work effectively is a good one to have, isn't it? Yeah. And it's and just if you measure certain things so you understand where you may or may not be making improvements. There was one organization who, as part of their recruitment process, they used to have put all of the people who applied through a certain set of tests, one of which it involved some kind of a spatial awareness test. And they actually looked at this whole process, because they were starting off with a fairly even balance in terms of gender. But by the time they came to the final, few who they were going to interview, that diversity had more or less evaporated. And so they actually looked at all of the things to see at what stage are we shedding. And it was in this sort of spatial awareness thing. And they went, but that isn't even mission critical. We don't necessarily need people to be able to do this thing. And, so sometimes it can be, the solution can be simple. But I think that the thing around culture is really important, and understanding the things that do make a bit of a difference to, to women. And also, when women, I know that when I had my daughter, that things really did change. And I found at that time in the BBC, certain inflexibilities made things very hard. And it's a real shame, because you lose talent if you can't take a longer term view on, and they're sporting both, men as well as women when they have families, because it's an important part of life, isn't it? As opposed to something
just a little, yes. Forget
about it. As let's accept that women are going to, perhaps their priorities will change.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's important to value talent and look at how you can do it. I know that, I lead a very small company, but the majority of people who work there are women. Many of them are part-time and have families and have got priorities of different kinds. And I think just sort of listening, and people's priorities do change. So what works well at a certain time doesn't work quite so well, Now for me, I don't mind when people do, the various tasks or work, as long as they happen, it doesn't. As long
as the results are there, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't matter, when. And I just asked that, if people have got, for whatever reason, any kind of, something happening in their lives which is making things difficult at work, that they just let me know, and we will work around that and find, and that's because I really value every single person. I'd be crestfallen if any of them, left TeenTech.
I think it builds an incredible amount of loyalty as well with the team, because unfortunately it is remarkable for employers to show that level of interest in employees. Unfortunately, hopefully that will change, but it does build an incredible amount of loyalty from the team when you extend that listening ear and flexibility to them as well. So
well, I as I say, I do preface that. I appreciate, we are a tiny organisation in the scheme of things. But there should be ways within a massive organisation for that cascading down for that level of appreciation and care, and just showing how much you value people.
Here are a couple of quick fire questions from a couple of listeners. Polly Brennan, who is a very adventurous lady. In fact, her business is Adventurous Polly. She asks, does Maggie think robots and or AI will ever replace humans at work, leaving us to pursue a life of pure adventure?
It was always something that was talked about, wasn't it? That somehow in the future, I certainly didn't imagine that I'd be working quite as hard as I'm working now, because the idea was that, whether it was robots or automation, that this would give us a life of freedom, and all it does, it seems to do, is create yet more and more work.
Agreed.
So, yeah. Well, do you know what? Again, the pandemic is dreadful. But I think it has encouraged a lot of people to reevaluate what really matters and what they want to do, and what they want to spend their time doing, and also just how incredibly precious time is. And I would love to think that we would hit a time where the idea of working, my perfect week would be sort of 3 days a week. I think 3 days 3 days with a 4-day weekend would be marvelous. And wouldn't that be possible? And would that mean that, more people would be employed and would do satisfying jobs? Would it mean that we might not have all of the stuff that we think that we need? I don't know what I'm not an economist, as you can probably gather, but I do think that having that time is really important. And for some people, they want to spend 6 days a week working. And that's fine. But I think that thing, and if you want to be adventurous and go do things which are really adventurous, then that's what you should be doing. I mean, the ideal way is to think, how can I combine my love of adventure with something that, recompenses me in some way? That's a good way. Can I combine the two in a way that would be really satisfying? Would be the clever thing to do. But no, I'm with you. I love doing the things that I love doing, and I've got better and better at making time for those things.
It's important. I'm reading Oliver Burkeman's book at the moment, where he's talking about exactly what you just said. Technology, in theory, is supposed to free up our time, and indeed it does. But it just enables us, or what we seem to do with it, is to just do things faster and harder. We just fill our time with more stuff rather than, freeing up our time and then going and doing lots of fun stuff. We just try and do more stuff. So really interesting question from Polly. Here's a question. David Miller, who's I know is a huge fan, asks, with everything Maggie has seen, does she think we will ever be able to transfer electricity via a wireless medium?
Yep. Yep, I do. There were some interesting, very early experiments with this. I'm now trying to think back. I think the earliest experiments happened in the States.
It was Nikola Tesla, wasn't it? And did work in this field. But have you seen anything that suggests that this is a technology we could maybe expect in the near future?
I mean, if I'm absolutely honest, I haven't seen anything sort of like firsthand. I've not gone and looked at something. So, I haven't seen any sort of full scale models of that working, but that doesn't mean to say that there isn't somebody doing it somewhere. Because I think that it's a very interesting development.
Talking of wireless, David Withington, and David, I know it was your birthday recently, so happy birthday to you. David asks, did you ever wonder if we'd be using a device like Captain Kirk where you could have a video conversation with somebody thousands of miles away? So when you first saw what we now know as like smartphones, cell phones, wireless devices, what was your reaction back when you first saw those?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm trying to think about what would have been the first device like that I actually saw. And, because we, talked about various things on Tomorrow's World. And, well, obviously the thing that we talked about endlessly was, one day we will all have a computer in our pocket, which I thought was completely unfeasible.
Really? Wow.
Just because I saw the size of computers as they were, and I think there's a bit of me that, though I like to think I'm very creative, was perhaps slightly unimaginative, and I certainly never thought it would be the mobile phone, because the mobile phones that we had during that period of time was so incredibly clunky, and all you could do was talk, and only if you were lucky and you happened to be in one of the little cells, as they referred to cell phone. I never thought we'd be able to be sharing videos and you just pick your phone up, as I do. And my great and lovely colleague from Tomorrow's World lives in America now, Howard Stableford, and we sort of like WhatsApp each other at this sort of time of day. I never thought that would be feasible. So I never lose that sense of wonder that this kind of thing is possible. I mean, it's just ridiculous that we can do this.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? And I think one of the something I recognised in myself recently with the pandemic. Of course, lots of people separated from their families for long periods of time. I originally from Birmingham. I caught up with my mum for the first time in over 2.5 years a few weeks ago. And of course, I missed her. But you know what? It was good to see her and give her a hug in person. But I didn't miss her from the perspective of, I wasn't staying in touch with her because I was seeing her almost every day on a video call. And it's amazing, she's 250 miles south of me, but we just felt like we stayed in touch all the time. And I've spoken to lots of people who have felt that same way. And it's a technology we just take for granted. And yet it's only in the past few years sort of video calling and that has become something. So, yeah.
I think the last 19 months would have been a very different experience had this happened 15 years ago, say.
Agreed, yeah.
I think it would have been very, very, very dismal. And we would all have felt far more isolated than we have felt.
Here's an interesting question. So Pascal Fintoni asks, can TV still play a role in inspiring and educating entire generations as it did in the 80s and 90s, and which sci-fi TV, movie franchises, those types of things? Pascal, specific question says, which sci-fi TV or movie franchise would Maggie like to have starred in? I would quite have liked to have been in Doctor Who. Because that was something I watched, when I was a kid, and like a particular generation, hid behind sofas because it got so scary at certain points. And then many years later, when I was a student at university, I doubled for Liz Sladen. Oh, right. Yeah.
In a different show, sadly, not in Doctor Who, but I was a student and I just needed, she didn't drive and I just needed to drive a car. They needed me to drive a car. And and so I thought, oh gosh, so near, but so far.
I could see you in the Sarah Jane role as one of the Doctor's companions.
I would have loved it. I would have loved to have been Sarah Jane. I'm not saying I would have been any good at it. I don't think I would at all. But I would have quite liked to have been there, or or Star Trek actually.
Star Trek, Pascal also put a PS in his message and he said, PS, Maggie would have been a brilliant Captain Catherine Janeway in Star Trek as well. So there you go. Well, thank you very much for the endorsement there.
When they did the first Star Trek movie, I went out to Hollywood and interviewed everyone on the set.
What an incredible experience.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So I met Spock and Captain Kirk.
Goodness me. There we go. That is a story. I suspect we could fill a podcast just asking you questions about that, but I will move on because two of the team, so I want to give massive shout outs to two of my team. We're on episode 100 here, and Cole Gray has been the man who has been behind the graphics for the show, and that's a huge public thank you to Cole. And Cole asks the question. He said, the move from multicolored swap shot to Tomorrow's World is a bit of a genre shift in terms of presenting duties, Maggie. Was Maggie always interested in science and tech, or was it her presenting role on Tomorrow's World that got her interested in the subject?
Yeah, it does seem a bit of a handbrake turn. As a teenager, I wanted to be a vet. So at school, I was interested in the sort of sciences and physics and math. But sadly, I came a bit unstuck with chemistry, and I didn't even take chemistry O-level because I was too proud. I thought I was too proud to fail an exam, so I thought I'm not even going to take it. So then I switched to the arts, but I was always interested in technology. So the Tomorrow's World offer did come completely out of the blue, and it happened I happened to watch me on Saturday morning. I think I was in somewhere. I was explaining how the cotton mills worked. So I did this explanation in typical Saturday morning style. And this producer was sort of watching with his kids, and he thought, well, she's quite good at explaining things, and practically on the strength of that, they offered me the role on Tomorrow's World.
Oh, wow.
Which was amazing. And I'm just forever. So they took a massive risk, a huge risk. And I had a whole year of, there were people there, and also just at that time on Swap Shop, as a sort of send up on Top of the Pops, we had made a video which was just meant as a send up of Top of the Pops. But then kids started wanting to buy the record. And much to our astonishment, it started climbing the charts. And then we were on Top of the Pops, which is the ultimate irony. And so we just done that. And so there was just like, what have we got this pop star doing on a science program? So the first year was quite hard going. I'm very glad that social media wasn't a thing then. I'm not sure I could have put up with it, but I did make a square hole very much rounder, and because I knew that the only way I could approach Tomorrow's World was by doing it my own way. And I suppose I did love technology. I was very curious. I wanted to understand how things worked. And I was very honest about what I didn't understand. And sometimes that's quite helpful when you're writing scripts, because you need to understand what's going to make somebody really want to find out more about whatever this thing is. Sometimes you do want to know how it works. And sometimes, quite frankly, you don't particularly want to know how it works, but you want to know what kind of impact it might have. And so just getting those priorities right, I think I understood how to do that. And I think the one thing I had going for me were the 4 years of a live 3-hour show with no script whatsoever. That was very helpful.
Yeah, baptism of fire, perhaps. If you can do that, you can do anything in TV, perhaps. And I would say for any of our younger listeners or anybody outside the UK are wondering what on earth Multicolored Swap Shop is, we're not even going to try and explain it. Just go and look that up on YouTube, and you will get a feel for the chaos that it was back in the day. But so thank you, Carl, for the question, and again, thank you, my friend, for all the graphics that you've done for this show over the last 100 episodes. I also want to give a massive shout out to the lady who puts together the show notes and the blog posts for this podcast, Gudrun Lorray. You have done an incredible job. Thank you for the last 100 episodes. Gudrun asks the question, Maggie. She says, what was your favorite future prediction? The most ridiculous and the prediction that didn't come true, that disappointed you the most. So the most ridiculous that you saw, and the prediction that didn't come true that you're like, oh, that really should have come true, or I wish it had.
Well, sometimes all of these things are bound up in the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the thing, I'm going to sort of answer this question slightly differently. So the piece of technology which I demonstrated and which I never thought would go anywhere was sat-nav. And that was because I demonstrated in-car navigation before we had the satellite bit.
Right.
And it was so clunky, and there was a computer with a bubble memory in the boot of the car. And it took forever to program this massive board on the windscreen. And I kept thinking, what exactly is wrong with the map? This is just ridiculous. So, that. And it was interesting because the companies behind that, they kept in touch, and I did their conferences for many years. And so, yes, then it did become a reality. And the missing bit of the jigsaw was the satellite navigation, which made everything so much easier. So that was a piece of kit. I often held groundbreaking technology in my hands and didn't fully appreciate its potential. And then, things like the digital camera. So that was a really very much a prototype stage. I mean, I think actually so much so that we didn't have the actual camera in the studio because it had been impounded at customs. So I had to do the demonstration of the digital camera without the digital camera.
Oh, wow.
Which is interesting. So that was a really cool piece of technology. And then the ridiculous pieces of tech. There were sometimes the actual demos required a massive leap of faith, shall we say, on the part of a reporter. And I remember coming into the office once and they said, we've got this great thing for you to demo, because super glue, which was sort of like this, as this amazing glue that everyone at that time was forever being taken to hospital because they glued themselves to something, or their eyelids, it was just horrendous. They said, they brought out this thing, and it's going to mean that you just put it on your finger and it unsticks the super glue. So basically, you're fine. But obviously, this was not yet in a product. It was a prototype. And they said, so what we want you to do is, they got a lovely idea, which was like me doing it. And I think this is available on YouTube. It certainly has been shared by the BBC archive stream. Want you to glue the arm onto the Venus de Milo, but get your finger stuck in the glue. And then you've got to go, ooh, bit of a problem here. Never mind. We've got this new stuff which is going to unstick it.
Right.
I cannot tell you how much of a leap of faith it was for me to actually glue myself to something
on live TV.
Promised that this stuff was going to unglue me. Anyway, I did this. But even on, when you watch the item, you can just see that moment of uncertainty as I'm rubbing my finger, thinking, is it actually going to unstick me?
Oh, that's amazing.
So there were lots of items. And technology, I think one of the things, because we talked a lot about, climate change and, the need to do things differently. And in various different things, whether it was solar power or, wind power and wave power. And I think the slowness of some of those technologies to be harnessed has surprised me. And we're obviously getting there, but it's taken a while, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So that I think is one of the things which is surprising how long. But I think it's always and hopefully with that people will we will start looking at ways of absolutely addressing our need to get our need for energy met in a different way.
Yeah, I think it's one of the I was going to say hot topics for me. That's probably an inappropriate choice of word when we're talking about environmental issues, but it's a real soapbox topic for me. And we've just had a heat pump, a boiler system fitted here, so we can start to extract the air. We're having solar panels fitted in the new year as well. But as you say, it feels as though, wow, why hasn't this happened? Why isn't this as standard already? So yeah, fascinating to see how some things go faster than you expect and other things just don't. I want to pick up on something you said earlier. So you mentioned Sir James Dyson and having him on Tomorrow's World back in the day. Recently, of course, we had the very sad news of Sir Clive Sinclair's passing. I can't underestimate the impact of Sir Clive on computing. I think myself and many other folks listening to this show will probably be in IT because they used a Sinclair computer growing up. I saw this amazing TV piece you worked on about Sir Clive from, I think it was Inside Out, or Inside Out East it was, and just a really incredible piece. It was probably from about sort of 15 years ago. How did you find it to be involved in tech and be around these people who are now, such almost mythical personalities as Sir Clive Sinclair and others? Yeah,
no. Well, it just really, I just very, very stimulating, very, very, exciting. And as you say, Sinclair was really responsible for getting the computer into the hands of people across the UK with just and in a way that was far more successful than he or his team thought it would be. Because as you saw, I chatted to the wonderful designer behind the ZX 80 and the ZX 81, and he sort of said, they produced it. The aim was, let's get this priced at under £100. So you could get it for, I think it was £99.99, but you could also get it for £79.99 if you bought it in kit form. And they said suddenly they would, as he put it, knee deep in checks. And it was success beyond their wildest dreams. And they changed things for, a whole generation.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, where I'm sat here, we're recording this interview across Zoom on video, and just to my left, I can see a Commodore 64. I can see a Sinclair Spectrum, a BBC Micro. I'm a geek for the old retro technology but genuinely, it was such an exciting time. And I don't believe I would be in tech without shows like Tomorrow's World. I don't believe I would be in the IT industry without Sir Clive Sinclair and the leaps and bounds that they made there. So just incredible to think that you worked with those giants of technology and got to be up close with them and see how their brains worked.
Yeah, no, it's a real privilege to meet people like that, and people who did think quite differently. Which is something that I often come back to with the young people I'm working with is we want to reward them for thinking differently and not always thinking the same.
Who are the people in your life who have been the biggest positive influences on you, and why?
Well,
and it doesn't necessarily need to be tech related. I mean, your career as a whole.
Well, it's quite interesting. So there were various people at different stages who did certain things. Rather like you, I had an amazing teacher, and she was a French teacher, and I had consistently just failed French right the way up to the age of 15. I hovered at about 42% in every single exam, and she came in. She was a new teacher. And after a couple of months, she said, "You know what? You're an intelligent girl, and there's no reason why you should keep failing French. So we've got mocks coming up in January. I just suggest, why don't you just put a bit of effort in, and see what you can do." And I know this sounds extraordinary, but until that point in time, I'd always been good at what I was good at, naturally good at, and very average at everything else that I wasn't interested in. So I did put a bit of effort in, and I got 65%. I can still remember the mark. And then I did really well in what were the O levels. And then I decided to do French at A level and got a grade A.
Wow.
So she did something really important, because it wasn't I deeply loved French, but she helped me understand that there were some things you do have to make a bit more of an effort, and for most people, French vocab is not going to happen by osmosis. You're going to have to put a bit of effort into learning it. And I took that on board, and I went from, say, just being very, very average to understanding how to learn. So yeah. She was really, and it gave me that bit of confidence in me. So she was fundamental. And then I think the other influencers, I often talk about Rose Gill, who took the risk of giving me that job on Saturday mornings when I was a student with zero television experience. So she was amazing. And not only did she give me that opportunity, but she also gave me amazing advice, which is, we want you to be yourself. You will make mistakes, but make your own mistakes. Don't make other people's. So, we will be with you. We're here to guide and support you. You will, some things will go wrong, but we're behind you and all that. And she was wonderful. She was instrumental in many people's careers on and off screen at the BBC. She was a wonderfully intuitive, highly intelligent, very brilliant woman. I was incredibly lucky to work with her. And then again, when I worked on Tomorrow's World, I just had the benefit of fantastic co-presenters, some wonderful producers, and we had a lot of fun, and we cared deeply about the programme. So all of those things became, that thing where you kind of set a bit of a compass for yourself, and you also set a set of standards by which you want to work, and standards for like an atmosphere of work, and also a purpose. I've always wanted to do things which I felt have a purpose, so there's a reason for doing it.
That absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing those. It sounds like you've had some really wonderful positive influences in your life from an early age as well, which is wonderful to hear. And I think it goes back, we were talking about my teacher, Mike Fisher, earlier on. So important, isn't it, for young people to have those positive influences and to let them know what they can be, what is possible and what can be done. So we have featured a whole host of amazing women in tech on the show this season. Who are some girls or ladies in tech who we may not have heard of, but who have impressed you, Maggie? Is there anybody that you can shine a light on that we could check out?
Right. Well, I always think it's slightly invidious when it's like if I start mentioning certain names, then there are loads of people who I could and should have and, ought to have mentioned. So I'm going to mention a number of lists, some of which come out every year, which I'm checking out. So the first of which is for the last goodness knows how many years, Computer Weekly has done this most influential women in tech list. And they have about 100 women every year on that list. And I check that list because there will always be names which are new to me. And, because I'm really interested in who's, and they are all doing very, very different things, working in different industries, sometimes at different levels. But they all share one thing, is that they're really, really cool people. So that's one list. And then there's the sort of the Northern Power women. And again, that's another great list of influences. And that way, I'm always interested in understanding and learning more about, different, the different roles that people do. So that, because I think it was CompTIA actually who did a survey once of all of their members to find out how many different job titles there were. And I'm going to get the figures wrong here, but let's say 1,200 people responded. There were 800 different job titles, which kind of gave you an idea of how this whole area is really expanding. But those lists are really worth checking out because you kind of see the different areas of tech that women are, both working in, companies where they're really thriving and enjoying their roles, and also the kind of things that those women are doing to sort of pay it forward to younger people, more junior people, to support them. That's really good to understand more about.
Yeah, we will include links to those lists in all of the show notes because we've talked about so much stuff here today, Maggie. And I know there's going to be people listening in the car or out for a walk. And don't worry, you don't have to remember all of this stuff. We're going to include all the details in the show notes for you to go and check out. We're approaching the end of our time together, Maggie. I'm so grateful for the time that you've given us today. Let me ask you this question as we begin to close up. What are your hopes for the future of the tech industry?
I'm fundamentally an optimist, and I think that the technology, the world of tech, particularly if we have a much more diverse sort of input and diverse. Hang on, I'll start that again. I'm fundamentally an optimist, so my hopes are that technology, as it becomes increasingly diverse, is going to develop products which are for the good of everybody as opposed to the good of just a selective few. Because we do have a slightly bonkers situation where technology seems to have created massive riches for certain individuals and certain countries, but this isn't really being shared. And it is just so important. It's important for, a million and one reasons that this changes, and that, we act as, a global nation for everybody, and make things better. And I do think that technology has a massive role to play in making that happen. But as always, it's not just the tech, it's the people behind it who really matter.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Maggie, this has been such a thrill to sit down and talk with you. You have given so generously of your time today and your experience. And again, you've been such an influence on me, such an influence on so many people who are watching this show. So thank you from the bottom of our heart for helping us to celebrate episode 100 of the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, many congratulations.
Thank you very much. If anybody listening to this show wants to reach out to you to continue the conversation or want to find out more about the work that you do with TeenTech, how can they find you online?
Yeah, well, it's very easy. If you go on the TeenTech website to contact us, but people are, more than welcome. You can either connect with me, send me a message on LinkedIn, or email me directly, maggie.philbin@teentech.com.
Wonderful. And you're very active on Twitter as well. We're both cat lovers. I see pictures of cats at Maggie Philbin on there as well on your Twitter feed.
Yeah. A house without cats would be a very empty house indeed, wouldn't it?
Agreed. Maggie, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for listening over the past 100 episodes of Tub Talk as well. Here's to the next 100. Maggie, perhaps we can speak to you again, episode 200, and
Absolutely.
See what's happened in the time that's gone by. Maggie Philbin, thanks for your time. Thank you, everybody, for listening. That is the end of episode 100. I will see you on episode 101. Thanks, everyone. Hey folks, Richard here. Thanks for listening today. I know you've got a ton of options for who you listen to nowadays, so I really appreciate your support. Do you have any feedback on this episode? Ideas for future guests? Tweet me at Tublog using the hashtag TubTalk. I respond to every tweet and really appreciate your feedback. This season of Tub Talk is brought to you by Barracuda MSP. Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. There are so many ransomware attacks, governments are now classifying them as terrorism. You've seen the news. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. It's not just big companies that are being targeted. Small and medium-sized businesses are becoming victims too. So what are you as an MSP doing to help your clients from becoming the next statistic? Barracuda MSP is here to help ensure you and your clients are prepared and protected against the inevitable ransomware attack. 1. Attacks start with an innocent-looking email that tricks users into revealing usernames and passwords. Barracuda MSP can train your clients on your behalf to recognize an attack and enable you to deploy anti-phishing technology. 2. Secure clients' web applications. File sharing services, web forms, and e-commerce sites often have weak points hackers are looking for. If hackers get into these applications, they go after business data. Protect access to these applications so hackers can't get onto your client's network. 3. Backup is a must. Today's solutions make it simple and fast to protect archives and backup or restore an up-to-date copy of an entire server or an individual file. Let Barracuda MSP help you strengthen your ransomware protection plans. As a special offer for Tub Talk listeners, visit barracudamsp.com/tubtalk and receive a free first month on any subscription you start with Barracuda MSP. That's barracudamsp.com/tubtalk and receive a free first month on any subscription you start with Barracuda MSP. Hey team, this is Richard again. Just one more thing before you take off, and that is MSP Insights. Now, every Tuesday, I share my thoughts on the business of IT with you, the managed service community. Thousands of managed service providers already subscribe to MSP Insights. It's easy to sign up, easy to cancel. MSP Insights is basically a short email from me every Tuesday without fail with advice on growing your IT business, plus cool resources I found, discovered, or started exploring that week. It's kind of like my diary me of cool things, and often includes articles or books I've read, tools I've discovered, and events I think you'd be interested in, often sent to me by my friends and Tub Talk podcast guests. So, if that sounds fun, a short, tiny bite of MSP goodness every Tuesday, and you'd like to try it out, just go to go.tub.co/Tuesday. That's go.tub.co/Tuesday. Drop in your email and you'll get the very next one. Thanks for listening.